Okay, so yesterday we discussed the background. We had 3 lectures on the background, which is quite important to have a good understanding of what we're going to discuss in the book of Daniel. So today we proceed and we'll start to discuss in more detail the prophecies of Daniel. So, what is important in the book of Daniel is to have a good idea of the historical background. Yesterday I already said a little bit about it. I gave you, when we discussed the person of Daniel, and we discussed the period during which he lived, the New Babylonian Empire, until the Persian Empire. But for many of us, maybe that part of history is not that clear. So you can't understand Daniel and the prophecies of Daniel if you don't have a very good idea about the flow of history. So Daniel is actually also a lesson in history. So who of you enjoyed history when you were still in school? You? Who else? You? A little bit? Yeah. So there's a lot of history in Daniel. So this is a general outline of history as background for our discussion. The time of Abram, that's about 1800 BC. The Exodus, that's about 1400 BC. I say more or less because it's a long discussion on exact dates, so we won't go there. The Neo-Assyrian Empire is also called the New Assyrian Empire. And I told you yesterday that there were also an Old Assyrian and the Old Babylonian Empire during these early periods, which we won't discuss. So it's called New or New Assyrian because it's the second empire. It's to distinguish it from the Old Assyrian Empire and the Old Babylonian Empire. In Abram's time, the Old Babylonian Empire just got started in the Middle East. So the New Assyrian Empire, 911 till 609. Yesterday, we saw it was during that period that the 10 tribes were taken into captivity. Then it's the New Babylonian Empire and also the time of the Babylonian exile. So 605 till about 536 BC, that's the period of the exile. So Daniel himself was taken into exile in 605. We discussed that yesterday. Then the Persian Empire arrived, or also called the Median Empire, more or less 500 to 300 BC. And the return from the exile was just at the beginning of that empire. Started earlier, but just after they conquered Babylon. They conquered Babylon in the year 539 BC. Then comes the Macedonian or the Greek Empire. The important name is Alexander the Great. He started this empire, and that was for the period of his life. Since he started it till he died in 323 BC. His empire were divided between his generals. We'll discuss it in more detail. But the 2 important parts were the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires or kingdoms during that period. That brings us more or less to the time of Christ. Also during this period, a very important person lived, Antiochus Epiphanes, or just Antiochus IV. We'll discuss him in quite some detail. On Friday we'll get to that part of Daniel. Daniel 8, Daniel 10 and 11. Then we come to the time of Jesus Christ. He was born in 4 BC. And died in 32 AD. Why 4 BC? Say again?
Yeah, Herodes died.
Yeah, but why that date?
Yeah, because in the Bible it says that Herodes was afraid and he killed all the children in the age from 0 to 2. And it wouldn't fit if Jesus was born on Noah.
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
because Herodes died.
Perfectly, in 4 BC. Yeah. Okay, then the Roman Empire also a very important empire. The empire was on the, yes?
But then he is 36 years old.
He was about, yeah. You think of that verse in Luke which says he was about 30 when he started his ministry. That's not really saying he was 30. It just says he was about 30, and the word is slightly more than 30. So we assume he was a little bit older, 33 maybe. Okay. During the time of Jesus, the Roman Empire was on the scene. The Roman Empire started in 27 BC. Yesterday I referred to Julius Caesar, the first emperor. And in 33 AD is after Christ, the empire was divided in two, in the Western and the Eastern Empire. The Western Empire existed till 476, when it came to an end. And then two other empires, we'll discuss this in some detail, but just to give you an idea, the Byzantine Empire, that was the empire that was in the eastern part of the Roman Empire, 330 till 1453. And then the Ottomans, the Muslims, made an end to that empire. And the Holy Roman Empires, in the western part, we'll discuss that also, from 800, who was king in 800 AD, most important king in Europe's history. Yeah, exactly. Charlemagne, Karel the Grote. He was crowned emperor in 800 in Rome, 800 AD, and that empire existed till about 1806, in the time of Napoleon. So a lot of history, but you need this general outline to discuss, to understand Daniel, the time of Daniel, but also the fulfillment of the prophecies of Daniel. That's quite important. So we'll come back to this quite a few times. Yesterday we saw there are various ways to interpret Scripture. One of the ways in which Scripture is understood is by what we call biblical criticism. These people believe that they should study the Bible in a scientific way. But we saw yesterday, in approaching the Bible in a scientific way, they're actually pre-assuming that we can only believe what we can prove. And how would we prove, for example, the divine inspiration of Scripture? It's something we believe. But how do you prove it? You see? So immediately, they have a different way of thinking about things. And sometimes people would call this a secular approach to the Bible. But this is a very well-established approach. It's a normative approach in a certain sense in society, and on Wikipedia you will read only this approach. So this is why you should understand also and have a good idea of what they are saying. In this view, the storyteller recounts events concerning the city of Jerusalem from the time of the new Babylonian Empire. So we're busy with Daniel chapter 2. Okay? So the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw and the various metals from which the image were made, and now he's discussing what happened there. So the storyteller recounts events concerning the city of Jerusalem from the time of the new Babylonian Empire to that of Antiochus Epiphanes. So I just referred to him, Antiochus Epiphanes. That was in about 164 BC. Okay. So I'll give two interpretations from the school, because there are, in fact, there are so many interpretations, but we group them normally together in various schools. So in this school, I distinguish two different interpretations. So first we'll just look at A, then we'll look at B. Okay, so explanation of the metal statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw, the head of gold. The A view and the B view, but the A view says that refers to the new Babylonian Empire. So the first part of the image, the head of gold, it was said to Daniel that this refers to the king, to Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel says that to the king. The breast, arms of silver. The A view regard this as imaginary Median Empire. So they think that the author of Daniel was mistaken, and he thought that such an imaginary Median Empire existed. So he had it all wrong, the author of Daniel. Then, just keep with A, when it comes to the belly and ties of copper, they say that this belly and ties of copper is the Persian Empire, which is well known. The Persian Empire, and they would say that the legs of iron with the feet of iron and clay, that is the Greek Empire after Alexander. Sorry, the belly and ties here, A, the Persian, then the legs, they say it's the Greek Empire. It's after Alexander's death, the empire became divided between the Seleucid and the Ptolemaic empires, which is the iron and the clay. So you see, everything fits in between the time of the New Babylonian Empire and Antiochus Epiphanes. That's where it stops. So the problem for the first wheel, we'll just discuss the problems just after this, but immediately we can see here they have imaginary Median Empire. To try and fit everything in there, they've got to go to these extremes to think that the author didn't know what he was talking about. Okay. The B view also says that the head of gold is the New Babylonian Empire. Some of these interpreters view this, the breast and arms of silver, as the Median and Persian Empire. So they agree. The Medians and Persians were together participating in one empire, also called the Achaemenid Empire. Then the belly and ties of copper, the B view says this is the Greek Empire of Alexander. And then when it comes to the legs, the B view says this is the Seleucid Empire. That was the empire that existed in Syria until the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. He lived till about 163 BC. So the important thing about these views, what is the most important aspect of this? What would you say? Anybody that want to try? Renanda? I'm going to start calling. I'm learning your names. Just give me a little bit of time. But what would you say? What is the most important thing of both these views? What is the main characteristic? Anybody else?
That it already ended.
Say again?
That it already ended.
Yeah, that is, everything happened before the time of Antioch. So when Antioch the fourth arrived on the scene, it was only then after that that Daniel was written. So Daniel was written only after the things have happened. So the author, we told you, as we said yesterday, the author in their view wrote history. He didn't write prophecy because they don't believe in prophecy. So they believe he wrote history. So he wrote after events, he wrote after the time of Antioch the fourth. So that's why both views fit everything in before that period. Because the author was writing history, not prophecy. Arguments against this view. Against the A view, Daniel did not in fact think that the Median Empire as some earlier empire apart from the Persian Empire. He didn't think so, because we can read it in the book. He regarded the empire of the Medians and the Persians as one empire as found in history, and there's 2 verses where we can see that. So Daniel did not believe that. He didn't believe in some imaginary empire of the Medians. That's not true. He believed in one empire in which both the Medians and the Persians played a role, exactly as we find in history. So he wasn't mistaken. It's this interpretation that is mistaken, because it's forcing a certain view onto the book of Daniel. It tries to fit everything into the period before 164 BC. The problem with the second view is the Seleucid kingdom, that's the Syrian kingdom, was much smaller than Alexander's empire, and geographically unimportant in the time of Antioch IV. Now this empire is supposed to be represented or symbolized by iron. And we read in the Bible, in the 2nd chapter, where the image is discussed, iron is the strongest metal. It says that iron breaketh in pieces and subdue all things. And he says this empire will do the same. It will break in pieces. It's the strongest empire. It's made of iron. But now, the Seleucid Empire, the Fourth Empire, in their view, is much smaller than the previous empires. It was neglectable in a certain sense. And the geographical area over which Antiochus the Fourth ruled were not large. It was actually quite small. It was just Syria. So it doesn't fit. This implies, in contrast to this view, that I must refer to the greatest empire of them all. So this view, in both interpretations, has serious problems. And the other problem, this view in both interpretations cannot explain the 10 toes. The 10 toes. Remember, the image had the head of gold, the arms and breast of silver, the belly and thighs of brass, of copper, the legs of iron, and the toes, the 10 toes of iron and clay. They cannot explain the 10 toes. They have no way to explain that. Okay, so this brings us to the evangelical interpretation.
Can you move one back?
Yes, I can go on back.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody happy? Okay, the evangelical interpretation. The explanation of the metal statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream. So at first, the head of gold, that is the New Babylonian Empire. We read that actually quite clearly in Scripture in chapter 2, where Daniel discusses the image when he told Nebuchadnezzar what he has dreamed, as well as what it means. And he said that you, O king, you are the head of gold. So the Babylonian Empire, New Babylonian Empire, that's what is referred to by the head of gold. So here we have quite a good idea. We can get an idea of where that empire existed, geographically speaking. This is the Middle East. This is Israel. This is Iraq, modern day Iraq. Here is Syria, Turkey. So this is where the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, where that was situated in history. So next comes the breast and arms of silver. If there's any questions, you should just stop me. This refers to the next empire that we're on the scene. We have seen that during the New Babylonian Empire, Daniel and Israel went into exile. Then came the Medians and the Persians. They conquered Babylon, and they were the next important empire on the world scene. So that's why they are the next empire that is of importance in Daniel. All these empires, we'll see, have ruled over Israel. And that's why they're relevant to the history of Israel. Okay, so this is the geographical area of the Median and Persian Empire. Normally it's just called the First Persian Empire. If you go to Wikipedia, you'll just find the First Persian Empire. But from a biblical perspective, we call it the Median and Persian Empire. Media were over here. This area is Media. You see Media there? And Persia is more over there. So again, this empire were even larger than the previous one. Egypt were included. The whole of modern-day Turkey were included. Part of modern-day Greece were included. And it stretches all the way towards India. So it was quite a large empire. Europe is, the continent of Europe stops over here. Brings us to the belly and thighs of copper. The Persians were also conquered, and they were conquered by a powerful king from the west. His name was Alexander. He came from Macedonia in northern Greece, and he conquered all this area, and you'll see it's more or less the same area where the previous empire was. But now it includes Macedonia. Northern Greece. So for short, it's often referred to as the Greek Empire. So Alexander was a very, very powerful king, ruler, emperor, He ruled over all this area, many, many countries. After his death, his empire were divided between his five originally, but shortly afterwards, there were 4 generals that ruled over the 4 parts of the empire. Most important for us is the Seleucus. Seleucus was one emperor, and he ruled over Syria and all these areas. Ptolemy ruled over Egypt, and then there was also these other 2, which is not so important for us. Brings us to the 2 legs of iron. So what was the great empire that came after Alexander? And after, we'll see now that the 4 parts in which his kingdom was divided is very much still, in the biblical perspective, reckoned as part of or flowing out of the Greek Empire. It's not, in the perspective of Daniel, regarded as an empire in itself. The next empire that arrived was the Roman Empire. And this falls far outside the period in which Daniel not only lived, but until the time of Antiochus the Fourth. So it's impossible for the author to have known about this empire. It came long afterwards. This empire was indeed very strong, very mighty, and very powerful. The Roman Empire, and we have good reason to associate it with iron. The strongest empire that the Western world has ever seen. What is interesting about this empire is the fact that it was divided in 2. Western and Eastern parts, which would now represent the 2 legs of iron. So we can very nicely see how the 2 legs fit in. So here is Rome, the center of the empire. The city of Rome ruled over all this area. Yeah, you guys were outside the empire. The Germanic peoples. Okay, now we come to the 2 feet of iron and clay. What would that be? The 2 legs ends with the feet. So we would think that the legs would come out of the area where the feet would come out of the area where the legs had been. Isn't that true? Because the one leg goes into the one feet, the other leg goes into the other feet. So we expect in the same areas where the 2 parts of the Roman Empire were, exactly in those same areas we'd have to find the feet. So the first we saw is the eastern part of the empire. What happened in that part? We call it the Byzantine Empire. These are the various geographical areas that was at some states included in this empire. The largest extent of that empire was in about 500, when it stretches over the whole Mediterranean Sea area. But for the most part, it was here in the east, where this empire existed. You see that's colored sort of in a grey shadow. That was more or less where this empire was in about 1000 AD. And for the larger part, it included Jerusalem and these areas in the east. Eventually, it was only a very small area in Greece that was included in this Eastern Empire, and then this empire fell to the Ottomans. So this is the eastern part. The eastern leg developed into what we'll now see, what we can now regard as the 1 feet. What about the other feet? We've discussed the western part. Now, out of the western part came also an empire, which was called the Holy Roman Empire. Some have said this empire was neither holy nor Roman. But it was called the Holy Roman Empire. Why was it so holy? Why was it a holy empire called the Holy Roman Empire? Who would like to take a guess? Yes?
Because the Catholic Church was has great part in it.
Exactly, perfectly. The Pope he crowned the Caesar. All Caesars from this empire were crowned by the Pope. So this empire was overseen by two rulers, the Pope and the Emperor. The emperor represented the continuation of the Roman Empire, because Charlemagne, the first one, was crowned in Rome itself. But it wasn't Roman, because, the center of the empire were not in Rome anymore. But the Pope were there, but it wasn't really the center of the empire. The center of the empire were elsewhere in Europe. Now, this empire moved through various stages. In the first period, it was actually centered in France, in the time of Charlemagne, of Karel the Grote. Later, it was centered in this area, which we see here. This is about 1080, slightly later. And later on, it centered more in Austria, in those areas, more to the east. And it existed until 806. That's about 200 years, 300 years ago. 200 years ago.
Really?
Yeah?
Okay. Also including Holland?
Yeah, it included Holland. At some stage or else, or other, yeah. And it existed until, as I said, 1806, 200 years ago.
Is it so?
Well, you can see for yourself.
Yeah, on this chart, yeah.
Why is it so important that Holland was included?
I just don't know.
You're thinking about the future aspects. Yeah,
I'll find it out.
I'll come to it. So what about the 10 toes? That's the question. So we see that the prophecy has been fulfilled very, very nicely and precisely over a long period of time until 1806. But there's one part that's missing, and that's the toes. We've come to the feet, the 2 feet that came out of the 2 legs, but we have not seen the 10 toes as yet. Where's that? What about the 10 toes? When will that be? At the time of the end. Because just after that, there was a rock that came loose in the mountain and broke the whole image in pieces. And this refers to the Messianic kingdom. So we expect the 10 toes in the time of the end. So will it come out of the EU? That's an open question. The EU came in the place of the Roman Empire and its later developments. The Holy Roman Empire, the old Roman Empire, this is the geographical area out of which the European Union is arising today. In Scripture, in the chapter that we're discussing, we read, in the days of these kings, the 10 kings, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, the Messianic kingdom. So it will arise, the Messianic kingdom will arise in the time of the 10 kings. So those kings will rule in the time of the end. The stone that breaks the statue, Luther thought it was Christ's first coming, but it might also be the second coming. We'll discuss that in more detail. So just to picture your world for you. Gospel for Europe. Now you have maybe another reason to consider why the gospel should be taken to Europe. This is just, I'm just leaving it open at this stage. The latter days, in Daniel chapter 2, in the passage we're discussing, that plays quite an important role. Daniel refers that these things, says that these things will happen in the latter days. The concept of the latter days is important throughout scriptures, and especially also in Daniel. The events depicted will happen in the latter days. Similar expressions are found elsewhere in the book of Daniel. The time of the end, the distant future, in all these verses, you will find that type of terminology. So some of the things in the book of Daniel do refer to the time of Antiochus IV. It does. But at the same time, it also, in some sense, refers to the events that will happen at the end of the day. And we'll see, in that sense, it's multiple. We talk about multiple prophecy. So in one prophecy, multiple fulfillments is included, or are included. The expression is also used by earlier prophets. Who would like to read Isaiah 3 verse 5 for us? Who would like to read that? Anybody? Johan, you have it?
Ja, Dutch.
In Dutch. Okay, read it in Dutch.
Daarna zullen de Israëlieten zich bekeren en de Heere hun God zoeken en David hun koning. Zij zullen zich in diep ontzag tot de Heere en zijn goedheid wenden in later tijd. Dat
Zo.
staat letterlijk aan het einde van de dagen.
At the end of the dagen. Yeah. So this is a concept that we find already in Old Testament prophecy. And it's very much accentuated throughout the book of Daniel. We also find it in the New Testament. We would like to read Acts 2 verse 17 for us. Michal? You're named after the great angel. We'll also discuss him in some of the later lectures. Michael will play an important role in our discussion. Okay.
And it shall come to the pass in the last days, says God, and I will pour out of my spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men shall dream dreams.
Okay, just read it again. This is a reference to an earlier prophecy in Joel that he is referring to. Peter is referring to that prophecy. Just read it again. It's a marvelous prophecy.
And it shall come to pass in the last days.
Stop there. It'll come to pass in the last days. What will happen in the last days? Yes?
Says God, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh.
Okay. So the Lord says, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. Now the latter days started already in the time of just after Jesus Christ. It's the latter days from that period until today and forward. But especially there's the earlier rains and the latter rains in the biblical way of thinking. And that represents the early rains. Okay? But the latter rains will be at the time of the end. So we can pray that the Lord would send His Spirit in power, that He would send revival in the time of the end, because that's in accordance with the prophecy. Wat sê julle in Nederlands? Een opwekking. Nee? Opwekking. Interessant woord. In English, revival. So we can pray the Lord that He would send revival. Dat hy 'n opwekking sal gee. Because it's in accordance with the prophecy. So latter days are very important. And maybe somebody can also read Luke 21 verse 24. Who would like to read that? In English. Or Dutch if you want. Marie-Louise, do you have it? Not yet.
It's in here, but Luke 21.
Luke 21 verse 24.
And they will fall by the edge of the sword and be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem will be trampled by Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles are fulfilled.
That's right, yeah. So Jerusalem will be trampled by the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So here it's referred to as the times of the Gentiles. The prophecies of Daniel primarily concerns the times of the Gentiles. It's Gentile kingdoms that's referred to throughout. The New Babylonian Empire, a Gentile king, Nebuchadnezzar. The Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the later empires that came out of the Roman Empire in the eastern and western halves, the Byzantine and the Holy Roman Empire. Well, maybe in the Holy Roman Empire, we would say we were a Christian king. But it was still a heathen king in the sense of they're not descended from Israel. So that's the nations. That's why it's called the Gentiles. Okay. And all these emperors and empires ruled over Israel. All of them. Even the Holy Roman Empire at some stage. So in God's progressive revelation, the times of the end and what will happen and how the prophecy is rolled out and being fulfilled becomes clearer and clearer as the end approaches. It's part of God's progressive revelation that we understand things better. And in later prophecy, some things are clarified that is maybe more difficult to understand in the earlier prophecies. Okay. Any questions? Now this prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 lays the groundwork for the book of Daniel. It lays the groundwork for the book of Revelation. It lays the groundwork, in a certain sense, for all eschatology. But because it gives an overview of the whole period involved, since the time of Daniel, when he had this vision, till the time when this rock, the Messianic kingdom, will arrive on the scene. So this is the groundwork, this is the basic framework. It tells us which kingdoms will arise, and had arisen already from our perspective. And we saw what is extremely important. We discussed two views, the biblical criticism view and the evangelical view. What have we seen? What is the most important feature of the biblical criticism view? Corinne, what is the most important feature of the biblical criticism view? Would you say? What would you say? Not sure.
Yeah, I think you're not really understand the question.
What is the most distinct characteristic, their way of interpreting Daniel 2? And not only Daniel 2, the whole book of Daniel. That view, the biblical criticism view.
The history that they didn't write prophecy.
Exactly. That the author of the book, which was not Daniel, which wrote at a late stage, they didn't believe that the person named Daniel actually lived. He made up these stories about these things that happened at the court of Nebuchadnezzar, etc. And he wrote history. He wrote after the facts. And to do this, he had to fit all these prophecies that we believe is prophecies into that period between Daniel and Antiochus IV. Everything had to fit in there. And in trying to do that, they have one of two options. The one option, the A option that we discussed, was to invent a imaginary empire, the Median Empire that was different from the Roman Empire, because there are too many empires. And in practice, in history, we don't have that many empires. They're one empire short, so they have to imagine another one. So they think Daniel was totally mistaken. But we saw Daniel was not mistaken. There are two verses in Daniel where he actually refers to the empire of the Medians and the Persians. Can any one of you tell me where he refers? I've mentioned the two verses, but who can remember where does Daniel refer to the empire of the Medians and the Persians? The two places in Daniel.
It was 8 verse 20.
Yeah, what says there? Can't you just try out of your, just without looking in scripture, just try and remember.
Mentioned it together.
Yeah, it's right, together in what context?
I don't know.
Yeah, when the writing on the wall.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It says there will be
The empire will be divided,
yeah.
yeah, and given to the Medians and the Persians. It was in the time of Belshazzar. That's what you're referring to. And the other one is more difficult. It's in chapter 8. And we'll leave it for the time when we get to that lecture. But there is also clearly stated. So there's no doubt that Daniel understood there were one empire ruled by both the Medians and the Persians. And Daniel actually says that the first ruler of the Persian Empire in Babylon were Darius the Median. And only after him came Cyrus as a Persian king, the great Cyrus. Okay. So the other way that they try to argue that we can fit all these kingdoms into that period before Antiochus the Fourth is to say that the last kingdom, the one presented by iron, is actually the Seleucid Empire, the Greek Empire that came forth out of that, the empire of Alexander the Great. But why is that not a good option? Why won't that work? What would you say, Jacobin? Why won't that work? Give it a try. Iron, the strong metal, the strongest, and we've seen that iron breaketh in pieces. Iron breaketh in pieces. Let's see there. It says, the verse says, iron breaketh in pieces and subdue all things. And this empire, the Seleucid Empire, was not that powerful. It was actually a very small geographical area where it existed, and it's not really a good representation. It's, to symbolize it by iron is not, it doesn't make sense. Okay, so both the arguments doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit. Yes?
What is then the main reason why they choose to, the biblical criticism, people, because they need a greater belief to fit it all in history, and not see it as a prophecy. But what is the main reason for them?
The main reason is they don't believe in prophecy as something, as a way of predicting the future. Because they believe that humans cannot predict the future. So they don't believe in divine inspiration and the possibility that God can supernaturally reveal the future through humans. Because they have a scientific approach, and that's not scientific. Okay.
But these two were wrong. How can we be sure that this is the right explanation?
How can we be sure?
With
You'll have to decide for yourself. If you discuss this with a scholar, a biblical criticism scholar, you'll have to make a good argument. You'll have to say, what is your reason? So what would you say? What is your reason? Why would you prefer the evangelical view? What would be your argument?
Yeah, I'm not sure about this, but I'm sure that God reveals to people that future.
Yeah, but now remember, the biblical criticism scholar don't agree with you on that. So you've got to use another argument.
It's the Bible says it, the Bible itself. So when you believe in the Bible.
But yeah, they believe in the Bible, but not in the sense that you believe in. So they won't go along with you on this. You'll have to give a better argument. That's what I'm saying. You've got to argue from the data. You'll have to use something in history that happened to make your case. Well, how would you make your case?
Yeah, I am
yes.
going to go indeed to that about the kingdoms when I don't know the solution one.
Yeah.
It was not as strong as it says. Something like that, and then ask what they think about it.
So if you look at the...
When that doesn't fit, then they say, yeah.
So that's problematic. If it doesn't fit, it's problematic.
Sorry?
So if they view, if it doesn't fit history, it's problematic.
Yeah, especially when you are a scientist.
Yeah, but you see, their answer is that Daniel was mistaken.
So yeah.
Yeah, he didn't know history that well. Yeah, he was mistaken. But we don't have to believe that, because what we've seen in the evangelical view is we have a very good fit. This is the first empire, Babylonian Empire, New Babylonian. This is the Persian Empire, Median and Persian Empire. This is the Greek Empire and the 4 parts in which it was divided. We'll come back to this in the next lecture. This is the Roman Empire. What is important about the Roman Empire?
The 2 legs.
Yeah, 2 legs, that's a good one. Very well, nicely presented. And what else? The most important thing. Yes, strong. Iron. So it's so precisely fulfilled in this, isn't it? It's a good argument. And out of this, they'll say, okay, the Roman Empire is long ago. What about the present? Now you say the prophecy is running through time, through history, it's evolving. What about this is long in history? What is the next phase? Oh, no problem. After the Roman Empire, just give it a little bit of time. Sorry. Okay. The two parts of the Roman Empire, out of that evolved to empires. In the eastern part were the Byzantine Empire, and in the western part was the Holy Roman Empire, and that brings us to 1806. That's just 200 years ago. So, there we've got it. And now we're waiting for the 10 toes, but maybe, quite possibly, it can arise out of the European Union. So we have reason to believe that the biblical prophecy, that Daniel actually really received the prophecy from God, which has been precisely fulfilled throughout history, and is in the process of fulfillment, running towards the end. Are you happy, Marie-Louise?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question for maybe in the next hour, but
Okay.
like America and the East, in all the...
Where is it on this? It's outside the world of the Bible. In the biblical prophets never talks about, maybe here and there some prophecies we can interpret in that way, but in that case the interpretation is much more open. But they mostly focus on the world that they know. So it's Bible prophecy is primarily concerned with Israel and the surrounding countries. Okay, let's take a break.